Hi, everybody. Zach Keenan here for DevilsDigest.com alongside our publisher, Hove Rubino. The last time we spoke was back in Salt Lake City. Much colder and much more disappointed feelings after that loss. But now we're here back in Tempe at the Carson Student Center getting ready to preview ASU's Week 8 matchup against the Washington State Cougars. And Hove, will jump right into it. We discuss so often about the physical important aspect of football, and that's not to mention that the mental aspect can't be lost. And there's a whole lot going on here, whether it's with ASU's opponent this week or if it's Pac-12 South race. There was no shortage of drama while the Sun Devils enjoyed a brief hiatus.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Zach. And the physicality is definitely going to be an element in this game, and we'll talk about that a little later. But you're right. The head coaching saga that took place in Pullman, Washington State, was in the headlines in the college football world for all the wrong reasons. As everybody knows by now, their head coach, Nick Rolovich, and 4 assistants were fired for not following COVID protocols in the state of Washington, and you wondered how much effect that would have on the Cougars when they did meet BYU at home last Saturday. And granted, BYU is a team that, ironically, after their win against ASU, has really been on the decline. So Washington State maybe did catch them at a good time in that respect, but obviously I think you could also make the same argument that BYU caught Washington State in a good time from their vantage point, because their first game without Nick Rolovich on the sidelines, Jake Dickert, the defensive coordinator, is now the interim coach for Washington State. And Washington State did play pretty well, but you just kind of wonder if a 2-point loss would actually be a different outcome if Washington State had its full slate of its head coach and those 4 assistants. And Washington State, let's not forget, before that BYU loss, Zach, they were winners of 3 games in a row. And that Pac-12 North is, much like the Pac-12 South, is really wide open. And Washington State definitely was getting some momentum in the last few weeks. And then this saga with the head coaching firing and the 4 assistants being fired as well hits them, and there's no doubt that it did have some effect on Washington State. And now you kind of wonder, has the win really been just taken out of their sails completely with all the drama that happened last week and a very close, disappointing loss at home, or can they somehow rebound? So their mindset is definitely something that's can absolutely determine what's going to happen on Saturday against ASU. Now, you talk about ASU. Nobody wants to go into a bye week with a loss, because now instead of talking about the loss 1 week, you're talking about the loss 2 weeks. And I think that ASU should be plenty motivated, especially with, like I said, with what's going on in the rest of the Pac-12 South right now. But I'm really just curious to see with ASU, which really has, I guess, their own problems, and maybe very different than Washington State, but they're not in the greatest place right now. How much can they rebound? Can that bye week hit the reset button really help Arizona State in this matchup? But you mentioned the Pac-12 South. Both Utah and UCLA, the main contenders for ASU for the South Championship, but both of them lost last week. Utah was riding high after that ASU win, and in a New York Minute showed maybe they're riding a little too high after that ASU win, losing on the road to Oregon State. And not to jump totally ahead, Zach, but that Oregon State game on the road for Arizona State, that might be the most challenging game on the schedule for the Sun Devils, because just like Washington State was up until a week ago, that is another legit contender for the Pac-12 North Championship. So right now you just have a Utah team that, yes, they do still control their own destiny because they have the tiebreaker against ASU, but much like ASU, they have to win out. So I don't think there's really more or less pressure on Utah compared to ASU and vice versa. And let's not forget that we have a rare day game in Tempe. So if ASU wins, Utah is kicking off 3 hours later after that game ends, and now there's even more pressure on them to see what ASU did again in case of a win. And okay, now we have to match that. So it's going to be really interesting to see just the mindset of Arizona State, Washington State, Utah, and I would say even UCLA was actually going to play against Utah in Salt Lake City this Saturday. They're coming off a very disappointing loss of their own against Oregon. I don't know if their quarterback Dorian Thompson Robinson is or is not going to play against Utah in that game. So all those 4 teams that I mentioned, Zach, are not coming in riding high into this weekend by any means, and that's why, to your original point, the mental preparation has to be absolutely on point as much as a physical preparation, as much as a technical X's and O's preparation for all four of those teams. And really, whoever can come the best mentally prepared is probably going to come out victorious this Saturday.
Now, aside from vaccine mandates and head coaching changes, we do have some actual football to analyze, so we can do that now, starting with the Washington State offense. Typically an air raid explosive offense, just that Washington State is synonymous with, but this year it seems to be a little different, Hode, because even in games where Nick Rolovich was calling the plays, they still struggled to put points on the board, just as they did last week, 19 in that 2-point loss to BYU.
Yeah, and it is not an air raid. It really is a run and shoot. I mean, if you want to be technical and in terms of the term. But yes, Washington State definitely wanted to keep that identity of being a high-powered offense that's lighting up the stat sheet and lighting up the scoreboard. And Nick Rolovich, when he was a head coach at Hawaii, definitely was able to do that to some extent over there with the Warriors. And when you look at Washington State, they only scored 25 points a game, which isn't something that is really a custom in Pullman. I think, although a lot of teams in the Pac-12 would love to trade places with them right now. But you look at their passing numbers, second in the Pac-12, but then you look at the rushing numbers, they're really ninth in the Pac-12. And some will say that that's really par for the course with Washington State, because sometimes when you put so much emphasis on the pass, the running game has to suffer. Even though when I looked at the stats, the distribution between pass and run is only 55-45, so pretty well balanced, but just not really getting all that much results in terms of wins and again in terms of points scored. Not a horrible number, but from a typical Cougar team, we're expecting much more. Their quarterback, Jaden DeLora, is someone who actually prepped at St. Louis High School in Honolulu, a powerhouse in Hawaii. So obviously the connection between him and Nick Rolovich is not coincidental by any means. And I feel that him having one of his worst games of the year last weekend was no fluke whatsoever, not only because of the deep connection that he has with Nick Rolovich, but also the fact that 2 of the 4 assistants that were fired along with Rolovich, one of them was the quarterback's coach. The other one was an offensive line coach. I think the offense as a whole, and DeLora, the quarterback in particular, really suffered in terms of having a very different sideline over there last Saturday. He's a young quarterback, and I think if ASU can really confuse him with pressures, with different coverages, I think that they can really come out victorious in this game, or at least win that matchup. ASU defense versus the Washington State offense. Washington State offense in the 2 road games they had so far scored 13 and 21 points respectively. So not that they're lighting up the scoreboard in Pullman, but even away from Pullman, the results are really even less impressive. But as much as we talk about the Washington State passing game, and for good reason, when you look at the numbers, we have to really keep in mind the running game for the Cougars. Max Borgi, maybe somewhat under the radar, one of the best running backs in the Pac-12, and probably not a coincidence that as much as DeLora was struggling against BYU last weekend, Max Borgi scored all 3 touchdowns, all of them rushing touchdowns for Washington State. So I think it's in some sense that's a good thing for Arizona State, because they don't have to be just a one-track mind and worry about DeLora, who passes just around 250 yards on average, but really now keep an eye on the running game and hope that what happened last weekend wasn't a start of a revival of that aspect for the Cougars, because if that's the case, I mean, they can be a much more dangerous offensive team than they are right now. And right now, like I said, at least in terms of passing game stats, they're not a slouch by any means. So really overall, I think this is going to be maybe one of the more challenging games for the ASU defense. I'm just kind of wondering, are we going to see a really balanced effort for Washington State, or is it really going to be just much more emphasis on the pass? But either way, this ASU defense giving up 28 unanswered points in Salt Lake City just 2 weeks ago, I would have to feel is plenty motivated to right all those wrongs, and I think they do have the formula, they have the talent to slow down this Washington State offense. But again, don't concentrate too much on the pass, because their running game, at least last weekend, showed a lot of signs of life.
That's important to note. As well, another graduate of the St. Louis Preparatory School is Ben Scott, ASU offensive lineman, so probably had some protection for DeLora there. Let's take a look at the other side of the ball, the defense for Washington State, and not a side that's usually one of the best in the conference. And this year, they're putting up quite literally middle-of-the-pack numbers. Their defensive statistics are in the middle of the pack. Do you see this defense being a formidable challenge for the ASU offense?
Yeah, I don't think it's really going to be a pushover, so to speak. But I think that compared to the other two Pac-12 teams that ASU played at home, Colorado and Stanford, this is a better defensive unit. When you look at the Washington State record as a whole, 4-4, really almost each and every game, this defense, aside maybe from the USC game, has really kept them in the game. And it's the maybe somewhat surprising struggles on offense that maybe prevented Washington State from winning one or two more games than they won to date. But this defense is giving up just around 25 points. So, not a great number, but definitely not a horrible number but by any means. Also middle of the pack in terms of their pass defense, but their rush defense is ninth in the Pac-12. And honestly, Zach, this team somewhat reminds me. Look at their inability to establish a run game on a consistent basis and inability to stop the run on a consistent basis. Really reminds you a lot of Stanford, and we really know how that game ended for Arizona State. So this is definitely an opportune moment for Arizona State, who had such a great ground attack against Utah in the first half. It was nowhere to be seen in the second half. It is time to go, quote unquote, old school when it comes to the ASU offense. And look, I've been talking a lot about how important it was for Arizona State in this passing game to really take that next step, how much it was going to be an X factor coming into the season. And I don't think I'll be hyperbolic saying that this passing game for Arizona State has taken the coaches and its fans on a wild roller coaster. I mean, started out really slow, just when you think they were getting some momentum with a peak against UCLA, then taking another dip, even in a win against Stanford, let alone the difficulties they had against Utah on the road. So I'm not saying abandoning the passing game, but I think that the running game really should get more emphasis. And I know that the run pass distribution for Arizona State offense is right now 60-40. When you and I talked in the preseason, we said last year was 65-35. It was time to bring that number closer to 50-50 or 55-45. But I think this 60-40 run pass distribution for Arizona State is working well. And the only thing I would tweak, and something again that I mentioned in the past, is Daniel Ngata getting more than one or two token rushing attempts. If you could give Daniel Ngata, DeMonte Traynham, and Rashad White just around 10 carries, maybe White and Traynham on the low teen side, and Ngata, if not 10, 8 or 9, I think that you're going to have a very potent ASU offense as a whole. You're taking more pressure off of Jaden Daniels and his wide receivers, which again have really been up and down all season. And look, let's not try to reinvent the wheel over here. When you have a rushing defense that is ranked 9th in the Pac-12, I think it's crystal clear what Arizona State has to do. Their defensive weakness plays right into ASU's offensive strength. And also when you look at the effect that you can have more time of possession and a potent running game, now you're keeping that very potent passing game for Washington State off the field for longer stretches. So it really is a double benefit if you can establish the running game, which again I don't think is a stretch for ASU to employ. So overall, like I said, just really go back to your roots, really go back to really what you do best, especially when the opposing defense presents that many opportunities.
We've discussed the head coaching saga, the expectations for Washington State's offense and defense, what ASU needs to change after that devastating loss to Utah. And with that loss, they face so much pressure to win out the rest of the season, almost as much pressure as they put on themselves to win out the rest of the season. So we've got a noon kickoff. I'm looking at you, parents of young children, looking to put those kids to bed early. We've got a noon kickoff. How do you see this one faring? Do you see ASU starting off on the right foot on a quest to winning out?
Well, Zach, it's not uncommon for a team to come out flat out of the bye week, but I think sometimes the teams that do actually really start very slow out of a bye week is teams that won prior to the bye week, teams that might be a little too fat and happy, a little too complacent, and that's obviously not the case with ASU. Like I said, the worst thing you can do losing right before a bye week. As I mentioned, now you're not talking about it 1 week, you're talking about it 2 weeks. ASU is plenty motivated to really get back in track. I mean, there hasn't been any shortage of critics at all after that performance in the second half against Utah. And the best way to silence those critics is to win and to win convincingly this week against Washington State. I also feel that When it comes to the pressure that Utah has right now, that is really motivation for Arizona State, because almost in the blink of an eye, Zach, right now it is a wide open race, more than it was just a week before. And again, you can talk about Utah controlling their own destiny. That is 100% true. It's also 100% true that the level of pressure, as you mentioned, is no different between Arizona State and Utah. And going back to my earlier point, if ASU actually wins this game on Saturday, they're putting pressure on Utah, putting even more pressure on Utah, that's going to play later that night. This is a team that plays much better at home than they do on the road, and I think it will show again on Saturday. It is kind of ironic, Zach, that not only did ASU win the 2 Pac-12 games at home that they had this year convincingly, but I think in both of them they were over a 2-touchdown favorite. Sure enough, and you can call it the head coaching saga in Washington State or whatever other reason. Again, Arizona State at home against a Pac-12 team is again a 2-touchdown favorite. I don't know if the game is really going to be that much of a blowout, because I think that, again, when you look at the offense and the defense for Washington State, if you compare it to Colorado, if you compare it to Stanford as far as a well-rounded team, this is a more well-rounded squad that Arizona State's going to face. But I do see ASU coming on top, going back to their winning ways, and perhaps putting some pressure on Utah later on Saturday night. So I see ASU winning this game 28-21.
You heard it from Hod Rubino. Well, that does it for our preview today. We will see you actually not Saturday night, but Saturday late afternoon. That's a change for once. So once again, for DevilsDigest.com, he's Hod Rubino. I'm Zach Keenan, and we will see you Saturday as ASU looks to take on the Washington State Cougars.